Why did the ACCC block the TPG-Vodafone merger?
And is Telstra's new Telstra Plus scheme really good value? Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Netcom, taking Australian technology to the global market.
Welcome to Vertical Hold, Behind the Tech News, where we talk to Australia's leading technology journalists to get the stories behind the news of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and I'm joined, as always, by Adam Turner, a man who's hanging out for a democracy sausage this weekend. Adam, are you ready for the big day? Have you got the sauce bottle and bib ready?
Absolutely. As they say in America, vote early, vote often.
We're also joined once again by freshly appointed El Presidente of Gizmodo Australia, because she's now officially the editor, Tegan Jones. President Tegan, welcome back to the show.
Thank you. I am here to reign over you all.
This week, we'll dive into the ACCC's reasons for blocking the TPG-Vodafone merger and what's likely to happen next in the mobile space, as well as looking at the fine print behind the new Telstra Plus loyalty scheme. But first, it's time to check out this week's tech news. Adam, what's happening in tech?
Facebook is tightening its rules around Facebook live streaming, instituting a one-strike rule to block the live streaming feature for users who violate the site's acceptable usage policies. This one-strike rule is rolling out in the next few weeks in response to the Christchurch massacre, and Facebook says the new rule would have stopped the original live broadcast from ever happening. The social media giant is also working to crack down on other people sharing that Christchurch video, having already removed 1.5 million videos globally which contained footage of the attack.
WhatsApp's reputation for security took a serious blow this week, with reports of an exploit that could unlock sensitive data on a phone with the popular communications app installed on it. All an attacker would need to do is send a specially crafted call to a WhatsApp number, and without even answering it, answers could potentially gain access to a lot of personal phone data. WhatsApp says it's patched the flaw on its servers and with updates to its iOS and Android apps.
It's been a big week in terms of Australian home entertainment. The Telstra TV3 streaming set-top box is now available to Telstra mobile postpaid customers, even if they don't use Telstra for their home broadband. Meanwhile, Apple has overhauled its TV app in preparation for adding subscription channels. Apple Music has landed on Amazon's Echo smart speakers, and Sonos has finally announced that Google Assistant will join Alexa on its smart speakers in July.
OnePlus has unveiled its latest flagship phone, the OnePlus 7 Pro, featuring an all-screen display, a pop-up selfie camera, triple rear cameras, and the Snapdragon 855 processor at a seriously appealing price point. There's just one tiny little problem. Like most of the OnePlus phones that have come before it, it's not officially coming to Australia.
So, Alex, WhatsApp has a reputation as one of the more secure services, as one of the earlier ones to embrace things like end-to-end encryption, but things are not well in WhatsApp land. What's going on?
Yeah, it's come under a serious attack, and when I say serious attack, I'm actually talking government level, or at least reportedly that's what it appears to be. Software developed by an Israeli security firm that may be used by some of the world's biggest governments. And I say maybe because actually getting concrete information on this stuff is kind of obscure when you get into that James Bond level of things.
Hi to our friends at the NSA for listening.
Absolutely.
If.
But it appears that their software was able to come up with a method to get actually quite a brute force thing to happen with WhatsApp, a buffer overflow that then allowed relatively unrestricted access to phone data. And the nasty bit about this is it wasn't a case, as so many of these things are, of fooling someone into installing something or clicking on something they shouldn't. All they had to do was send you these data packets to get access.
So this really sounds like the kind of thing that the Australian government was talking about taking advantage of when they said they wanted to break encryption. They didn't really want to break encryption. They wanted to find workarounds to sneak on devices. So this is the kind of thing that would let you snoop on encrypted messages without actually having to break that encrypted message in transit because you read it before it goes into the encrypted pipe, yeah?
Yeah, pretty much so. It's a side door. It's not a break in end-to-end encryption. Now, Tegan, I know you're a lady who's interested in communications. Have you deleted WhatsApp from your phone and run screaming from the internet in terror?
The thing is that I have WhatsApp on so many phones because I test so many different ones that I haven't had time to yet. But on my primary device that I'm using at the moment, I didn't have it on there anyway, so I was lucky in that regard.
They have released an update, though, to patch it, haven't they?
Yes, that's right, they have.
I actually found when this story broke, I went and checked because you should. And if you are using WhatsApp regularly, you absolutely must go and check whether or not your app has updated itself. Mine had. So I was already at least covered. But part of the nasty part of this is that they've got something like 1 billion plus users, but they cannot say how many phones may have been compromised. Given the government level of this, given that the security firm, whether or not you believe them is another matter, has said, look, we don't actually just sell this stuff to anybody, you're probably more at risk if you are in human rights work, because that seems to have been where it was actually discovered to be a flaw, or in some kind of other combative to a government role.
Journalist.
Like a journalist.
Yeah.
Well, journalist.
He says throwing his phone in the bin.
Yeah, well, yes and no. I think at a general consumer level, I don't think it's a no fear situation. I don't think it's a high fear situation. Do you think that's a fair call?
Yeah, absolutely. But I guess that's how it goes for any time this conversation comes up, whether there is talk of, breaking encryptions or when a hack happens or anything like that. They always say that, for regular people, you probably don't need to be worried because most of us, who's going to really be interested in like the weird stuff that we're probably texting our friends? But it is important for people who, the government or whoever might want to spy on, and a lot of time they do say, lawyers and journalists, watch out.
This one did get a lot of mainstream coverage, though, because I was at my dad's house today. My dad is in his 70s. He's got his first smartphone a couple of years ago. He's just sort of finding his way around because my brother lives overseas. So he uses WhatsApp to talk to him. And my dad said to me today, do I need to update WhatsApp? Because I saw there was a security problem. And the first thing I thought is, wow, my dad's been hacked. This is not my dad that I'm talking to. This is some kind of Russian scam. But no, so even my dad, who only, follows the mainstream media, had picked up that this was an issue that he needed to do something about.
But that's a really measured response. So I like that he was like, oh, do I need to update? Not this app's terrible. Burn it, because usually that's the reaction to mainstream media reporting. So, look, I'm a fan of your dad. I like it.
I hate to have to break this to you, Adam, but your dad might be a Russian sleeper agent. Had you considered that possibility?
Yeah, it would explain a lot.
So, Adam, your favourite consumer Avenger has been at it again. It's time to roll out the old Sims says smash line.
Sims smash. He smashed it big time. This is one of the biggest smashes we've seen from Sims in a while. He's gone the full green, I think. We've been talking on the show for a long time about the potential merger between Vodafone and TPG. And this was a big deal because TPG was talking about building a fourth mobile network in Australia. Whether or not they were actually going to do that, whether or not they had the money it was going to work is a separate story, although maybe that's the real story. And so that was going to be really good for competition. It might have introduced a new pricing war, at least in the metro areas. And then Vodafone and TPG said, let's get it on. So they decided to merge until Sims Smash said, no, you don't. Alex, I'm not convinced that this decision is good for competition.
Some of the background of this is that the ACCC kind of accidentally announced that they were going to block it. TPG and Vodafone were waiting to hear, and then in their mergers register, they basically said, nah, and then realised, oops, we actually should have said more than that. Yeah. So they put out a really fast release to say, yes, we're going to block it. We'll give you a bit more detail a bit later. And then they came out with their more measured response, which detailed why they thought it wasn't a good merger. To an extent, they're doing their job because they're interested in consumer competition, and their view was that the merger would have stifled competition. It would have essentially, in the ACCC's view, maintained that kind of triple set of Telstra, Vodafone and Optus that we've already got in the mobile space, or if you want to look at it from the broadband space, we've got Telstra, Optus and TPG.
These are the same people who didn't have any problem with Nine and Fairfax merging, which an even more heavily consolidated market than telecommunications. So it does seem like a little bit of a double standard there.
I'm not sure that it is. I think the road to entry in the mobile and broadband space is considerably more expensive, but they definitely seem to be pushing TPG more towards the idea, and Rod Sims said as much, that TPG was the best prospect Australia had for a new mobile network operator to enter the market. Tegan, do you think that they're right? Do you think they're wrong? Can they compel TPG to build a mobile network? It doesn't seem to want to.
Well, the thing about this is that, they were going to. The problem is that, last year, we find out that, TPG does want to get into that market, that they're going down the 5G route, and that Huawei was going to be the equipment provider. But of course, towards the end of last year, Huawei equipment got banned by the government off the 5G network, which was obviously going to present a problem for TPG getting into that market. And back in January this year, they basically announced, we're out now. We have to be, because Huawei were our way of doing it, and the government stopped that. And the problem is that the ACCC are talking now like, they can still go and do it. Let's go and do it. But TPG made it very clear back in January that they're already, I think, $100 million in the can in capital expenditure. So if the ACCC expect them to still go down the 5G route, I'd love to know how.
But TPG shelled out for a lot of spectrum, didn't they? So they've still got that in their pocket. And maybe that was part of the reason between the TPG Voda merge, but that spectrum was one of the big things that they brought to the table. So now could they maybe sell that off to someone else, or is it any use to them?
It's a good question, because they've said nothing about that, ever since January, really. They haven't said that they were going to go and look for another equipment provider, which I do believe Optus did do when they were originally going to go with Huawei as well. They've said nothing about it. So, at least as far as TPG is saying to the public at the moment, they're not getting into that market. But they might. They just haven't said anything yet.
It's an interesting one in that spectrum story as well, because you've got the 4G stuff, which TPG's actually sat on for a number of years now. I mean, they were sitting on mobile spectrum for years before they ever announced they were going into the mobile game. And then you've got the joint venture between TPG and Vodafone, which still exists. And actually, when they announced the merger, they said, hey, we're going to do this as a joint bid. And even if the merger doesn't go forward, we're going to do joint 5G. So that's also in a really kind of perilous state, especially when you consider Vodafone really hasn't said much about its own 5G at all relative to Telstra and Optus.
Yeah, that's a really good point as well.
So there was a story doing the rounds that maybe TPG never really intended to build a network at all, and all of this was just a power move for some of their bargaining. What do we think about that?
I mean, it's expensive. If it's $100 million, is to believe. I mean, it's an expensive power move. Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, I think it's fairly clear that the Vodafone merger was probably a more generally affordable, maybe not cheaper, but more generally affordable way to get into that market. You merge with Vodafone, you very instantly have a large-scale market share, because if you look at TPG is huge in broadband and tiny in mobile, and Vodafone is almost the exact opposite. So there's a I hate to use the word, but there's some nice synergy there.
Yeah, because the merge would bring, I mean, these numbers are probably not quite accurate, but something like 6.4 million mobile subscribers from Vodafone joining TPG's 1.9 million fixed broadband subscribers. Like, that's a huge merger.
And I guess this is also what worried the ACCC. If you want to flip it back in that direction, you are creating a very large incumbent there, which has potential on the broadband side of things, because all of them, by and large, are going to be using the NBN, which is meant to be an open access network. Suddenly you have these three big hulking giants sitting at the top of the Australian broadband tree, which was the problem we had before we started building the NBN. TPG and Voda aren't exactly just going, oh, well, ACCC says no, sorry, sir, we won't do it again, are they?
No, they're certainly not. So when this did break a week ago now, actually, like you said, it was kind of accidentally released by the ACCC. They quickly got an announcement, an actual announcement, and press release out. But it didn't take very long for both Vodafone and TPG to release their own response, and basically they're going to federal court, and they're going to try and sue them and sue the ACCC for opposing the merger. And so off the back of that, the two companies are saying that they're going to extend their merger agreement until August 31st, I believe, 2020, to allow the federal court to come to a decision and to then, if they win, be able to then start the ball rolling.
Alex, Telstra's finally throwing a bone to its loyal customers with Telstra Plus, but is it a plus or is it a bit more of a minus?
Well, it's an interesting idea. It is a first in the Australian mobile space. It's basically a loyalty scheme, sort of similar-ish to the one that you might have with an airline, but not quite. And it replaces their existing Telstra Thanks thing, which lets you get pre-sales on concerts and slightly cheaper movie tickets and things like that, with a tiered system based on the average of the amount that you spend. So if you spend between zero, and I don't know how you spend between zero and still qualify, but if you spend between, this is according to Telstra, if you spend between $0 and $1,499 a year with Telstra, then you're a member. Between $1,499 and $2,999 a year, you're a silver member. And $3,000 or more with dropped into Telstra's coffers a year will get you gold status with Telstra.
Why isn't it bronze?
And
why? I'm sorry.
I don't know. This is exactly the question that I asked the very first time I saw this. I have no idea why it's not bronze.
So they basically break down to roughly $100 increments. So if you spend a bit more than $100 a month, you're in the what should be bronze.
Not bronze.
A bit more than 200, push not bronze. But to get into silver, you'd be getting up closer to 200, and gold would be 300.
Silver's 125 or thereabouts. It's not quite as much as you think, but
to get silver, you'd have to be getting probably broadband and one other thing, or at least two services, probably, even with Telstra, to spend that much.
Yeah.
Oh, you could. I think silver, you could do broadband at one.
Yeah.
If you were doing broadband and like a cheap prepaid, they do still have cheapish prepaids. You might just tip under the limit for it. But it's basically, it's a 2-service deal, but you can group them by family. So if you had a 3 or 4 person family, you could actually potentially bump up towards gold. But it's a weird setup because, for example, with like a frequent flyer scheme, you join that, you fly with the airline, you fly enough, and you bump up your tiers over time because you earn the points. You earn points with this, 10 Telstra Plus points for every dollar you spend.
They're not calling them Telstra bucks. That's a missed
They're not
opportunity.
Telstra bucks. They're not Telstra bucks, and we'll get to why that is in a minute. But because they don't want to start people right now, because they launched the service this week, or they launched being able to sign up for the service, and we'll get to that in a minute as well, because they don't want to have people having to wait for a year till they get to silver or gold, they're saying that it's actually going to be an average based on what you're spending per month right now. So if you were spending enough to be silver, or if you were spending enough to be gold, you'd get that for a year, even, and this is according to Telstra, even if you then dropped services to a level where you'd be below that.
Okay, well, I guess that kind of makes sense. You've got to have some kind of starting point, as you say, without starting everyone off at 0. Yeah. So what's the benefit? Why would I want to be not bronze, silver, or goldish?
So bronze is more or less the Telstra Thanks thing as it was. So you get cheaper movie tickets, you get access to their pre-sale stuff. They've got some vague chatter about money can't buy experiences, but they have said squat about what that means. So I certainly wouldn't sign up on the basis of that because it could mean anything, even a boat, but probably not. But if you qualify for silver, they'll give you $75 credit on their Telstra TV box office service. So that's basically movie rentals, as well as I think it's 1 premium service call per year and a month's worth of access to KO Sports. If you punch your way up to gold, you get $110 worth of Telstra TV box office credit per year and 3 months of KO plus fairly much unlimited access to that premium service tier. So basically, if you rub Telstra's back real nice, they'll be real nice to you if things go wrong. Yeah,
which, I mean, I was skeptical of that at first until I, actually remembered that their 24/7 tech support, their Telstra Platinum is not just Telstra tech support, which is kind of cool. I do like that they will help with other things as well. So that's something.
So will they fix my garage door opener? Will they repaint my veranda.
Yeah, Andy's
Will
going to
they
come over
recharge my
personally.
Vodafone hotspot? Now, I'd pay money to see that. Will they get Sol Trujillo back to clean out my gutters?
Careful, Adam, careful. Now, Adam, you kind of queried about whether or not they're Telstra bucks, and they're not, because they've got that classic thing where a point might be worth all sorts of things. We've got a couple of examples which give us an idea that a point is probably worth about half a cent.
Yeah.
Ooh, big money. Big money.
Yeah.
This is sounding very frequent flyers.
No.
No. Correct me, Tegan. Why isn't it frequent flyer?
Well, this will be going into something I was going to talk about later, but the reason why I don't think it is like frequent flyer is mostly because with frequent flyer schemes, say like Qantas or what have you, two things. Number one, you will earn more points. So if we're looking at our Telstra bucks, what do you want to call them? On a frequent flyer scheme, if you're on bronze, you get 25% more points when you fly, 50% more for gold, 100% more for platinum. So you're getting more points. That doesn't exist on Telstra. Everyone is still just earning the same amount of points. And the big one for me as a frequent flyer, it's kind of well known that there's not a whole lot of point in spending your points on, hardware, just because you usually have to pay extra money yourself and it's just not bang for your buck. The money is in using it on services. So whether that is upgrades for flights or flights themselves. But Telstra aren't offering that option, at least not yet. So, if you could maybe use some of those points towards like international roaming or something like that, I think that would be great.
Oh, yeah,
but
that'd be
that
nice.
option isn't there. You can only go with hardware. Most of the examples of which we've seen so far, you have to lay down cold hard cash as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. They got very, very nervous when I kind of said, "Oh, look, are you looking into services discounts for points?" They didn't outright deny it. They didn't say they weren't doing it. But the body language spoke volumes, I think, in terms of their comfort level with doing that. The cash thing is an interesting one because one of the examples they've put up is a Google Home Mini, and that you won't need to spend
That's
cash
true.
on. You'll just need to have 14,000 Telstra points to get it.
Which,
and they cost $60 at the shop.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. They will be offering bonus points for certain things, like for, signing up before July, things like that. But taking that out of the equation, let's just say you're just earning points. That means that you need to have a spend with Telstra of $1,400 to get those 14,000 points for something, like you said, Adam, cost $60 at the shops.
And you could leave Telstra and go with someone else who was a hell of a lot cheaper and save $60 every month.
Yeah, and it was similar.
Easy, without breaking a sweat.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the other ones that they were offering was like Netgear's Nighthawk M2. So the RRP on that is $384. Obviously, different shops will have different pricing, but let's go with $384. You need 15,000 points for that, and you need to drop $215. So that equates to $1,500 worth of spend on Telstra services for only $169 of actual bucks, real life money knocked off.
I'm going to put my rarely worn happy optimist hat on.
Did you wipe the dust off it? Did you get the cobwebs out of it? Careful, there might be something living in a spider or a snake or something.
If I've got, for example, a Telstra broadband service, I'm clearing near $100 a month on that thing for the one that I would.
Sure.
That means that my 15,000 points for the Nighthawk router is a little bit over a year's access to that service, which I'm paying for already.
Yeah, totally. No.
Why is this a bad thing?
No, and I agree with you. If you're, and this is one of the things that I wrote about as well. It's that, it's an opt-in service. It doesn't cost you anything to sign up, like some rewards programs do. So that's great. So for anyone who's just going to be paying their bills anyway and they're just passively earning points, great. That's amazing. But I do think that it is going to be way more beneficial for families and, larger households, like we mentioned. But for singles or smaller households who might not have a slew of these services under their in their back pockets, it's going to take a really long time to actually earn these points and to make it worth it. And I mean, that's the thing. Like, do you want to have a rewards program where it's like, oh well, at least it's free? Like, don't you want them to be excited about it? Like, I would really love to see Telstra, and they might do, to be fair, they're the only telco that are doing something like this so far, and they're only at the start of the journey. And so maybe they have big plans in mind. But from my perspective, wouldn't it be better to have something that's not just being used to kind of, passively reward customers who may or may not remember that it even exists, rather than doing something that's great that might make people leave other telcos for it?
Well, that comes down to that question of whether or not you think it's Telstra trying to keep the customers it's got. And I suppose it's worth pointing out, Telstra has a huge market share in mobile, huge market share in broadband, especially. So it's got a lot of customers that it can technically please with this deal. And you mentioned the whole opt-in nature, and I do want to get back to that in a minute too. But is this a strategy, though, just to retain those customers, which it said it's wanted to do under the whole Telstra 22 thing, or to grab new customers? Because I think it's slightly different for if you're looking at Telstra from the outside. As Adam said, there are lower cost providers out there, and I don't know that this is so much a come join us, we have Telstra points, as it is a please don't leave us because you've got all these Telstra points.
Yeah, I think you're right, and the way they've very strongly been talking about it is definitely in regards to their current customers. They're rewarding their current customers. So I 100% think that you're right about that. I don't know. I'm someone who spent years working in national rewards programs, like working across them. So maybe I have a bit higher of an expectation, and I know how great it can be for customers. So I guess I'm probably looking at it with a more critical eye. I'm not saying it's bad at all. To be doing anything is great. I can see the possibilities, and I would love to see that from Telstra.
Let me put on my cynic hat, which gets a really good workout, I can assure you.
I think there's holes in that thing from how frequently it's worn, isn't it?
I think I'm on my third one this year. We all remember back to the days when it was impossible to compare plans because they made it very hard to compare apples with apples. And then I think it was our good friend Sim Smash or those kind of people who stepped in and said, no, you've got to put in these. Now, Alex, what's the name for it? Is it a CIS, a statement or something?
It's a CIS, yeah. The information summary, yeah.
Yeah, so and every telco has to tell you the same thing. This is what a 3-minute call will cost. This is what a meg of data will cost. So you can actually compare plans. This seems like to work against that a little bit because they can say, oh, this is our CIS, plus you get Telstra bucks, and you can't compare like with like and figure out exactly how those Telstra bucks weigh up to someone else who might be giving you a better deal, but no Telstra bucks. Now, I'm not saying that's the only reason why I'm doing it, but it does go back to that old style of just clouding the issue a bit. And as you say, making you think, oh, maybe I shouldn't go because I weigh it up against somebody else and I get a better deal, but they don't have Telstra bucks and I don't quite know how to weigh that up.
I do think they are two separate things because you don't have to pay for them and because they aren't attaching them to services at the moment. I think that they can probably keep those two things pretty separate. It might become a little bit more convoluted if they do start bringing in, Telstra bucks for services, though.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned before, it's opt-in. And I thought that was really interesting because consumers, generally speaking, are pretty lazy about this stuff. I mean, an awful lot of people stay with the same providers of all sorts of services, gas and water and all the rest of it.
Lazy tax.
Absolutely. Lazy tax stuff. So I thought it was really interesting that they were doing this as an opt-in because there are going to be consumers out there who are potentially going to miss out on their Telstra bucks because they just don't get around to signing up. And Telstra's official explanation of this was because they have to account for the value of the points. And if they opted everyone in, they'd have to account for an awful lot more points, even though I suspect an awful lot of people just wouldn't use them. And they do have a 3-year expiry on them. So an awful lot of them would just expire over time.
Yeah, you're right. And again, as someone who's worked in this area, so two things. Number one, people will absolutely forget about it. Like guaranteed they will. They will also, when they realize what they're missing out on down the track, say 6 months, 12 months, whatever, they are going to call up and they're going to ask if they can get the points that they feel like they retroactively deserve because they've been paying their bill just like everybody else. And when I did ask that question of Telstra, they did say that, they're not, at least at this point, they're not going to honour that. You have to be signed up in order to get those points. So I think that might be a slight sticking point. But on the other hand, besides accounting, I will say in Telstra's defense, again, as someone who's worked in this area, when people think that they have been signed up for a program that they haven't, so let's say they automatically sign people up, that worries people because they think there might be data collection. They might think that, people are looking at their accounts, what they're buying. I've never worked for a company that's actually done that, but people think it's happening. So I do get Telstra's perspective on that. Not that they said that was the reason why, but I do feel like that would be a legitimate reason as well.
Telstra's an ISP. They're already legally obliged to look at your metadata, folks. That ship has sailed in one sense, but I do know what you mean. And I guess it comes down to that really interesting argument you can have about points generally as to whether or not they become self-printed currency, the value of a point. As you said before, with frequent flyer, there's much more value in a flight upgrade or in booking a flight than in getting a set of headphones or what have you out of that. Telstra's not going down that services road, so it's probably avoiding that entirely. But you will have to be careful with that 3-year expiry, because you could find that you're just not hitting the goal that you need to. And because the points you earned were 3 years ago, you're just never actually jumping that particular hurdle either.
Absolutely.
And that sound can only signify that it's time to wrap up yet another episode of Vertical Hold. But before we go, we'd love to hear your feedback. Should the TPG-Vodafone merger go ahead? Are free points for gadgets enough to get you to switch or stay with Telstra? Let us know by dropping us a line on Twitter or via the Vertical Hold Facebook page. Thanks to President Tegan for sparing us some time from her busy schedule to join us again.
It's a pleasure to be here as always.
Viva el Presidente! Thanks for listening, everyone. We're on a big push this year to reach more people, so thanks for your shout-outs on social media. Remember, it helps if you jump on your podcasting platform of choice, leave us a review, and help spread the good word. Vertical Hold is proudly sponsored by Netcom, taking Australian technology to the global market.
That's right. So not going into the end credits.
Number 2. No.
Yeah, please don't.
No. Even though you said it, we're still not putting it in.
Please no.